Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a topic that's going to be a little more nuanced than normal, and that's going to be the topic of using progressive range of motion and how to go about doing so correctly. Because what people need to understand, this is something there have been times when I spoke out against in the past, and it's largely because people will do this in a way that is completely incorrect, and in doing it that way, they will actually sometimes regress and lose strength. Okay, so people need to understand when we start talking about taking a period of time on a big exercise and using partials, and notice when I'm doing partials here, for example, that I'm only taking 4 inches out of the range of motion. It's not like I'm doing half reps, it's not like I'm doing third reps, anything like that. So we're not talking about strong range of motion partials. Talking about stuff to where you either take pins and you do dead stop training or you do board presses or things like that. And I wanted you guys to note a couple things. Number one, even when you see me doing these, you're only seeing 1 rep. I'm not doing rep work. Okay? Hitting pins for rep work is a one-way ticket to destroying your joints. You want to beat yourself up and hurt yourself over time. Start bouncing weight off pins for multiple reps. That's a real good way to do it real fast. It's a good way to mess yourself up. See some younger guys who'll do it and get away with it for a few years, but eventually it will catch up with you. So, people need to understand, first of all, this is being done for maximum effort work. When I'm doing stuff like this, these are for max lifts. These are ramping up maxes. So you're seeing me ramp up over time. And then these two were taken obviously a week apart, and there's 1 inch difference in the range of motion. But you'll note that I'm down here at a range of motion that's right about where my personal sticking points might be. Okay. Also, you're going to note that I do full range of motion training on the backside of it, particularly your rep work, your volume work. So what people need to understand, first of all, heavy partials, even if they're heavier than your max, do not increase hypertrophy. Okay. When you're lifting heavy weight, we're not always doing heavy weight for hypertrophy. We're doing it to create maximum force, to learn to strain, learn to struggle, to push through weak points to find grooves. You don't get bigger always by doing your singles very much. You get very, very little size. That also includes the joint angles involved. So if you're only doing singles for it, you're not getting a lot of drawbacks. If you're doing your rep work from partials, even if it's with a weight heavier than you could do for a full range of motion to overload, quote unquote, you gain less muscle from it. That has been repeatedly shown in studies. Every study that looks at it finds that if you do a half rep, for example, for say sets of 10, and you increase the weight because you're stronger for that half rep, which you should be, you gain less muscle. Okay? People in the studies gain less muscle, and it's not just a little less muscle, it is dramatically less muscle. It's terrible for hypertrophy. So accordingly, when you're working on building the muscle fibers associated with doing the full range of motion exercise, your rep work needs to be full range of motion. So you're going to need to do supplemental work off the back of this stuff. And that needs to be made very, very, very clear. If the partials are your primary mechanism for growth, you're going to fail miserably. You're going to fail miserably. So what are we doing with them? Well, I'm dealing with progressive range of motion. Sometimes you're not even always stronger. Sometimes when you cut 3 inches or 4 inches out of the range of motion on an exercise, or even 2 inches, you lose strength. Because if it puts you in a position that's hard for you to move the weight from a dead stop at, which is what a lot of this partial training is, right? Because partials like this, or in progressive range of motion training, just like we talked about doing with chains, a similar concept, done with full range of motion but changing the strength curve top to bottom, right? It sometimes puts us into positions to where we're at a disadvantage. And we're always doing them from a dead stop. Whether it's a board or a dead stop bottom-up pin press, because otherwise you have no way to control the range of motion. And it's not a true progressive range of motion. You need to be able to control it to the inch. So in this case, I'm doing this and pressing off of pins, and then I'm setting it back down under control. 1 rep. 1 rep. Now, you guys noticed who followed this back when I did this at first, because this video's not going to be out for a couple of weeks. I got 10 pounds stronger the first time I reduced it an inch. So when I went down an inch, so it should have been harder, I got stronger. Why? Because we started with kind of were close to my own weaknesses, my own sticking point. Now, one of the things you do when you mess with progressive range of motion, when you start dealing with points in your exercises that are kind of sticking points for you where you tend to slow down and get weak at, forces you to learn to push or to pull from that position. Well, why does that matter? Because what you're going to find when you have to go to a dead stop movement that's at close to your sticking point, you're going to find when you attempt to hit a rep max or 1 rep max, what happens? You only have one bar path where you can break the weight off the dead stop. In other words, if you're going to press or squat or anything off of pins that are above the normal bottom of the range of motion, when you start getting heavy, you can't break weights that are 95% or higher off of just any point. In other words, there's only going to be one spot over your chest as far as where the bar is placed up or down your chest, like again, is proximal and distal, meaning how close it is to your head, between your head and your feet. So in other words, you could slide the bar up or down the pins more. You're only going to have one point where you can break it off the pins when it starts getting really heavy, when it starts getting close to maximum weight. And if you position yourself wrong and you're off by 1 or 2 inches from your optimal bar path, what happens? You can't break it. You can't break it off that spot. And it's the same thing with a squat. You're going to find one position and knee position and foot position and back position where you can actually break it off the pins when it gets above 90%, when it starts hitting 95% or more of your max off the pins. So in other words, you won't be able to hit the lift until once you find a position, you're able to slide back and forth till you can find a spot where you can break it off of. And you will have exceeded your max at any other position. And you'll have one position you can break it off of. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that when you're doing the movement normally, that's your ideal bar path where you can lift the most weight. So doing progressive range of motion like this is a training tool, first of all, that lets you find your leverages and your bar paths. So make you a better lifter. It'll teach you where you're strongest at. People say, well, why does that matter? If we're just worried about tension and stuff. Well, it matters because when we do max effort work, including variations on a conjugate system, I don't care whether it's conjugate or something like chaos and pain that Jamie Lewis or anybody does, we lift maximum weights to learn to strain maximally. We lift maximum weights to get good at lifting heavy. And if we're going to lift maximum weight, for any given set of movement patterns, there's only going to be one ideal bar path for you. You can only lift heavy one way. And that's another way to put it. I've heard Louis Simmons put it that way. There is only one technique in which you can lift maximum weight on any given exercise. So you have to learn your personal leverages, and that's going to start applying to other things. Because if it applies to one chest press, it's going to start applying to other chest presses. If it applies to one of your squat variations, it's going to start applying to all your squat variations. This teaches you to find your personal levers, find your best leverages, okay? And it allows you to find the bar path through which you can move the most weight, where you're strongest. All right, that has carryover. It's a training tool. This doesn't actually make you stronger. It teaches you how to be stronger. Your hypertrophy makes you stronger. Which is why this doesn't build strength. It helps you develop and refine it. Volume training is what builds the strength, because your size is where you get your strength. And that is not subject to debate. The research is pretty firm on that. That's its own topic, though. And we've talked about that in detail. So the progressive range of motion lets you do a few things. It lets you, first of all, sometimes find a spot where you can get your best position. Sometimes you can lift a little bit heavier than normal from that. And so as you bring it down, you get used to that little bit of overload. You get used to holding the heavier weight in your hands or sitting on your back, and you learn to bring that heavier weight down further. Again, when straining maximally as a max effort lift. I want to reiterate, this doesn't build the strength itself always. You have to do your volume through the full ranges of motion that you want to get stronger through. Because if you don't, you're not going to get stronger. In other words, if you did nothing but a bunch of pin presses like this 4 inches off the chest and you don't do anything down lower, don't be surprised when you're weak at the bottom. Okay, don't be surprised. You still have to hypertrophy all those fibers. Even if we practice pushing maximally through a variation like a pin press, Even though you get good at maxing by practicing maxing, you still have to hypertrophy the muscle fibers and the movement patterns involved, all the muscle fibers involved with that. But by bringing it down, you can get used to handling that heavy weight further and further down. Or in some cases, you start PRing further and further down. If you start at a point that's a partial for you that you're weakest at, you learn to find your ideal groove. And then when you add an inch to the range of motion, you learn to blast through that groove again. And when that happens, you start PRing sometimes as you add range of motion, the opposite of what you would expect. So it can have merit with that also. But people need to understand there's a right and a wrong way to go about doing this. It works very well on a conjugate type system or any max effort system where you rotate max effort lifts while doing supplemental work. It doesn't work outside of that environment. You're going to have problems with it outside of that if you're not very, very careful. In fact, you might regress. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.